decided that a website would be the best way to display all our findings and background information so that anyone could log on and look at what we had discovered. So to create a website, we used Google, and we decided to name our website Fairy Tale Physics. And in creating the website, we tried to organize it so that you could kind of go through and see exactly how we collected the data. So on the sidebar, you'll see we start with Cinderella's story. We start with the most important part of any experiment, which is the assumptions, so that we would make sure that all of our calculations made some sense with how the stories were originally written. Then we divided up the categories by force and power calculations so that we could look at these stories in a few different ways that we've learned about physics this year. Then the final tab under each of the stories is the reality check section, where we took our findings and assessed how realistic they are in terms of what we actually know goes on in the physical world. And then underneath those two stories, we have our video demonstrations, because we thought that that would be a good way for people to see the actual process that went into doing all of this research. Finally, we have the conclusions to sum up all of our findings, and then below that, our sources. We found a lot of interesting sites with lots of information that we found very helpful to this whole procedure. So we wanted to put a sources section in this website so that if anyone had any further questions, it would be very easy to go out and find that information. A lot of time went into figuring out what assumptions you would need to make for these calculations. And unfortunately, the authors of these fairy tale stories don't exactly give us a lot of real-world numbers because, well, it's a fairy tale and they weren't exactly concerned with telling us, specifically how much Rapunzel weighs or exactly how many seconds it takes for Prince Charming to climb up Rapunzel's hair, or exactly what type of glass Cinderella's shoes were made out of and how much force they could sustain. And so a big part of this project was trying to figure out creative ways to somehow get these numbers so that we could use them in the equations that we've learned throughout this year. The way we did this was first by looking in the original stories. And that's why under both the Cinderella and the Rapunzel story page, you'll find a copy of the entire fairy tale. Of course, it's not like we could get too many numbers from these stories, but we did find a few things. For example, to answer the question, how tall is Rapunzel's tower? We saw that one of the versions of Rapunzel talks about a tower 20 L's high. And upon further research, we found that an L is a unit of measurement that converts to about 44 inches. So we were able to find the tower height from that. Some things were not so easy. For example, figuring out how much these princesses would have weighed. To do this, we used small details from the story and then tried to match those with outside knowledge. For example, we knew that Rapunzel was locked in the tower until her 18th birthday. So with that short amount of knowledge, we then looked and found information about weight to age ratios and then averaged what an average weight would be for an 18-year-old girl. So in this way, we kind of tried to match the very slim knowledge from the actual fairy tales with a lot of actual knowledge from the real world. We did the same thing when figuring out Rapunzel's hair. We looked at exactly how fast hair grows over a few months or over a year, and then we figured out how long Rapunzel's hair would have grown if she was in the tower for 18 years. Another problem that we faced when finding the assumptions was that for the power equations, we would definitely need to have some sort of time. So this was a problem because obviously the stories don't tell us that it took Prince Charming exactly 1 second or 2 seconds to climb up Rapunzel's hair. So we had to do a little bit of background information on rope climbing. And we checked out some of the world records for rope climbing and found a record for a man that would have been exactly the same age as Prince Charming. And then we used that number to figure out about how fast Prince Charming could have climbed up Rapunzel's hair, which is essentially exactly like a rope. And then we use that number then to base how long the witch would have taken to climb up her hair. And so that's kind of the process that we went through for all of these assumptions. Because they're fairy tales, we were not given an abundance of real numbers and real statistics, but we were able to find creative ways to bring together the creative and fantasy elements of the fairy tale with actual statistics about real-world applications of these fairy tales. We decided to analyze the story of Cinderella in terms of forces, but we had to have a little help from the program known as Graph Logger Pro 3. Logger Pro is an award-winning data collection and analysis software that can be used for both Windows and Mac computers. Basically, it lets you capture videos to add a visual record of an experiment that's synchronized with your data. And then you analyze a video frame by frame, or you can even take measurements from a still photo. So this allowed us to perform the statistical analysis of the data. And we were able to look at the graph to figure out things like velocity, and then from there, Cinderella's acceleration. Logger Pro is suited to a wide variety of data collection experiments, such as time-based data, selected events, events with typed-in entries, photo gate experiments, even radiation counting. And we found it to be perfect for calculating the precise amount of force that Cinderella would exert on her glass slippers.